I'm Ken Richards, and I'm a retired pastor. I've worked with the Voice of Prophecy for a number of years as a researcher and scriptwriter and associate speaker. And we're interested in stories that underscore and strengthen teachings of Scripture, one of which, of course, is God's hand in history, not just history in general, but in personal history and history of the church, even a local church. We're going to be talking about a local church. And there's a story about it that was printed in the Pacific Union Recorder back in February 1 of 1999. And the title of the article is Miracle Church Opens in Palm Desert. And it's a short article, and there's a lot more to the story, a lot more that should be told. And when I saw this or heard of this story, I thought, here's something that we need to let people know about, that we need to talk about. And I'm here now in the home of Pastor Norman Farley and his wife Alice. And we're going to discuss the Miracle Church. Now, Pastor Norman Farley, what about this Miracle Church compared to other churches? All churches, in a sense, are miracle churches. What is it that makes this church different?
Well, Pastor Ken, welcome to our home. It's a delight to have you here.
Happy to be here.
Now, the word miracle, of course, was a word that was used by the conference brothers and sisters in the Southeastern California Conference in this particular article. I didn't give them that word. They called it a miracle church because from day one, they believed it was impossible. Now, I suppose when they sent me down there that they knew that I had built 5 churches and most recently had completed the Oceanside Church. And it was an entire faith project, which frankly, without the support of the community, now by that I mean the community fathers, the city fathers, the architectural committee, all the committees that had to be passed, without their support, this could never have become a reality. And so we have to say, in short, that if all the conference and the church members and myself had all worked together, that without the community, this never would have happened. And that's one of the great miracles. And we'll talk about why in a minute.
Yeah. I'd like to hear you mention some specific hurdles, impossible challenges that you had to get through, you and your church, in order for a new church to be built, etc.
Well, we were at the Indio Church, and in order to sell the Indio Church, it needed to be completely redecorated. Now, that was an entirely possible task, which we did. But there's one thing about redecorating a church and another thing about selling a church. Now, you can't buy land until you have money, and you can't get money until you sell the church. The problem was, in Indio, there were no churches that needed to buy a church, with the exception of just one. And that was the Indio Spanish Church. Now, the Indio Spanish Church had been condemned by the city, and they desperately needed a new church. However, they had bought a beautiful piece of land, and the conference brethren, the Hispanic conference brethren, were dedicated for them to build on that plot of land which they had bought. So they said, no, we will not buy the Indio Church. No possibility. And the church, the Spanish church, voted no possibility of buying it. Well, this was the first hurdle, the first impossibility. However, when they, some years later, a year or two later, went to build, and they found out the cost of what it was going to cost to put a building up on their piece of property, and the new rules of the city that had gone on, it presented a whole different picture. By that time, the leadership, Spanish leadership at the conference had changed. And so they came and looked at our church. They said, you know, you get a church, you get a school building that will be vacated, you get a child care center, you get a football field, and it's all in a date grove. And for $1,350,000,
A deal.
they changed their mind. It was a deal.
Yeah, for a lot less money.
And so I have to thank Mario Perez for making this possible. He's a dear friend and a wonderful, wonderful Christian brother.
So there were a number of hurdles you had to get over. That was one, but there were more. What were some of these other hurdles?
Well,
Impossibilities.
There was a parcel of land on Country Club Drive. Now, Country Club Drive, of course, is where the Marriott Hotel is, and it's a lovely place.
That's Luxuryville.
Luxury. And my wife had was dealing with a parcel of land, which she'll tell us about. And however, the city had turned down building on that 5 times in a row. So in order to have that parcel of land, what can I say? Something that's been turned down 5 times.
You're going to be number 6.
It's going to be number
Bad
6.
number.
That's right. And then on top of all that, there was the difficulty of bringing together the Palm Springs Church, the Indio English Church, and the Spanish Church, the Indio Spanish Church. The impossibility or the difficulty of bringing all those people together to put a school together. Because, of course, everybody had a different idea about where the school should go. Some thought it should go in Cathedral City. Some thought it should go in Rancho Mirage. And so putting that together was one of the most difficult struggles. And I have to thank some really dear people. Chuck McKinstry at the conference office, and Ralph Martinez, who later became the pastor down at the Indio Church. All of these people.
Chuck Mitchell.
And Chuck Mitchell, yes, Chuck Mitchell, all came together, and it became a possibility to do if we could get the piece of land.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned that your wife had something to do with getting that land. So we're going to let her talk now. Alice, you tell us about the details.
We used to live on Country Club Drive in Palm Desert, and one day while we were driving towards Indio, we noticed a for sale sign on some property on Country Club Drive. I wrote down the phone number, and since I'm a real estate broker, it was decided that I should place the telephone call to find out about the property's location. When I called the phone number, I was told by the person that the property that they were advertising wasn't on Country Club Drive, but it was on Bob Hope Drive in Rancho Mirage. They also told me that the city owned most of the property there on Country Club Drive, and the city didn't want any buildings being built there. But they told me that they knew that there was one lot that might possibly be for sale. But they told me they couldn't give me the telephone number or the name of who owned that lot. So one of our church members by the name of Barbara Connell worked for a title insurance company. So I said to her, Barbara, please get me the list of all of the people that own property on Country Club Drive in Palm Desert. And so she gave me the list. There were, quite a number of names. And so I created a database with everybody's name in it, and then I merged a letter to every person that was on the list. And would you believe, we got a response from only one person. Now, another one of our church members, Merle Dake, who was also a real estate broker and had a lot of experience in commercial properties, I asked him to help me make the contact with the person that responded. So he made the initial phone call. After that, our attorney friend, Rick Borg, negotiated the terms for the sale and finalized the purchase of the property where the church is now built.
Wasn't there a child care center involved in this whole thing? How did that come about?
Well, in order to build on that property, I had to get the consent of the community, as I stated. But in specific, that meant the Marriott Hotel and the Racquet Club, which were kind of directly across the street. Now, neither the Racquet Club or the Marriott Hotel wanted anything on that property. And so all they had to do, Pastor Ken, to get something stopped was pick up the telephone, call the city, and say, "This is the Marriott Hotel. Remember, we have 1,000 rooms over here, pay a lot of tax.
Yeah.
We don't want it."
Yeah.
And that ended it.
Yeah.
There was no more discussion. And that's what had happened 5 times.
And who would want a school over there?
And who would want a school on Country
Or
Club
even a
Drive?
church?
Or a church.
Yeah. Unless it was a grand cathedral or something.
Yeah, and you know, one of the reasons that the Racquet Club didn't want a church across the street from them was because they hated bells in the steeple. And in getting this thing passed, we had to guarantee that we wouldn't put a steeple up there with bells in it to make the Racquet Club happy. But let me talk about the Marriott Hotel.
Yeah. How did you get there?
Well, there was a lady in my church, very lovely lady, and she had a boyfriend by the name of Bob Holland. Now, I had never met Bob Holland, and he evidently heard about our thinking or the dilemma that we had, and so with this country club property. So one day he came to see me, and he was a very wealthy man. He owned a large portion of Lawrence Welk properties. He owned a hotel. He knew the city fathers. He'd been dealing with them for years. And he came to my office one day and he sat down and he said, "Now, Pastor Norm," he said, "do you really want to build on that lot over on Country Club?" I said, "Yes." He said, "If you do, I'll tell you what you have to do." He said, "You have to go to the Marriott Hotel and you have to get their permission that they will not show up at the city council to vote against you or in any way contact any of the city people."
So how did that come
Oh,
about?
boy. You know, that was really difficult. And he said one other thing too. He said, "You know, the engineer for that property is a man by the name of Larry Johnson. And he has done the engineering and for 5 times tried to get that through the city. He knows everything about that property. So before you go to the Marriott Hotel, you talk to Larry Johnson, you get all the details, and then you go see him at the Marriott." Well,
Good counsel.
that was good counsel. Now, you see, the Lord sent that man.
Yeah.
You see, that was kind of an intervention
Sure.
that you could not anticipate because I had never met him. I didn't know him. So I went to the Marriott Hotel, and I can tell you, my knees were shaking.
You weren't full of confidence.
I wasn't full of confidence. And so I went to see the director, and I said, "You know, could I get an appointment with the people here at the hotel, the directors?" And they said, "Well, we'll set it up. You come back in a week." So I went back in a week, and I had been thinking about what I might say to them. And so I told them about our project, and I said, "Now, would you come to the city council and speak on our behalf?"
Oh, yeah. So did he come?
Well, what they did was they thought about it and they looked at me and they said, "We won't vote for you and we won't vote against you if you build a child care center."
Well, now, a child care center costs a lot of money. That would be another major hurdle, wouldn't it? What would that cost?
Oh, $500,000.
Okay.
Now remember, this is a small church,
So,
less than 200 people.
yeah, and you've just drained them, you might say, by refurbishing the Indio church so you
And-
could sell it.
And the lot
then
was
you
$1,350,000.
Yeah, $1,300,000. So what happened after that?
Well,
You're in a bind again. You're in one of these impossible situations.
well, here was the impossible situation. We could purchase the land with no guarantees of building anything
Yeah.
on it. Now, let me ask you, Would you do that if you were pastor of the church?
No, because I have good sense, you see. I, I operate sensibly.
But you see, I had to operate by faith.
Well, yeah, if you're going to, unless you're going to waste that money or let it sit there for a long time in that property.
Well, you see, that's the thing. We could purchase the land with no guarantees to build. And we would have to also put on the child care center. And we'd have to get a use permit for the school and to build the building for the church.
Yeah.
And if we did that and we didn't get permission, we would have a magnificent lot. The Southeastern Conference would own a magnificent lot on a beautiful street that was vacant.
That couldn't be used for anything. Well, I mean, it seemingly
Used for
couldn't be
anything.
used for anything. Yeah.
So, you asked me about how am I going to do that?
Yeah, how are you going to raise that money?
Pastor Ken, I
Just
didn't.
go to your church and
I
say,
didn't
"We
have a
need
clue.
$500,000."
I didn't have a clue. So, what I did was, and that was a big part of the miracle. You see,
Yeah.
I called up my friend, Attorney Rick Borg, one day. Now remember.
First you had a little season with God.
Oh yes, I had a little season with the Lord. I said,
I think
Lord, this is your problem.
all through this thing you did a lot of praying.
Lord, this is your problem. I had a feeling down in my stomach how the conference brethren might feel if we bought the lot and it sat vacant. But I said to the Lord, Lord, we can't do anything but move by faith, and faith doesn't always have sight. And so this is your problem. You'll have to guide and lead. And I could see that he had been guiding and leading. And so I called my friend Rick Borg, and I explained my dilemma. Now, he had been a big help in the building of the Oceanside Church, one of my
Now, he was an attorney.
Yes, he was an attorney, and so I called him up, and I said, Rick, I said, I got an impossible circumstance, and I am completely helpless. Sometimes helplessness is a good thing.
And so what was his counsel?
Well, he said to me, Norm, he said, I can't tell you how to raise $500,000, but, and these were his very words, I can tell you what pond to fish in.
So you had a problem the size of the ocean. Maybe he's helping you narrow it down a bit to a pond.
He got it down to a pond. He did. And that was beautiful. That was beautiful. Because if you get it down to a pond, and he got it down to a particular person in the pond.
A particular fish.
Yes. and that, you see, this was all, Ken, totally unrehearsed, totally unexpected, totally out of the thin air, totally only the things that God could put into an impossible situation.
Oh.
And he said to me, you go visit Dr. Bain.
Okay, now this is somebody you knew and was a friend of yours, or what?
Ken, I had never heard of her name. I had never met her. I didn't know one thing about her. This is what he said to me. He said, Norm, he said, she's an unusual person. And if she likes you, she'll let you on her property. And if she doesn't like you, she'll throw you off. And
that's encouraging.
yes.
You know, at least you have a 50-50.
Yeah, 50-50 chance. So I went up to her house. She lived in La Sierra, and she'd been a wonderful pediatrician in San Francisco for many, many years. And she was 92 years old. And I got to tell you, she was as sharp as a tack.
92.
92. And I visited her every week, twice a week.
Now, can you tell me a little bit about that first time you contacted her? Did you do it on the phone, or did you walk up to the house and knock on the door, or what?
No, I'd been rehearsing that.
That would be, that would
I
make
did.
me shake, you know.
I walked up on her door, and I knocked on the door. She came, and I said, I'm here to visit you. I'm a friend of Rick Borg. And Rick Borg was her attorney.
Ah, okay. Okay.
And I figured that might get me in the house.
Listen and learn.
Yeah. And so that got me in the house. And, right away, up front, we began to hit it off. And I began to invite her to go down to the desert with me. Now, this wasn't something unusual for her because every year while she practiced in San Francisco, she had gone to Palm Desert every year. Doesn't that sound like a miracle to you that you would run into a doctor, 92 years old, who practiced in San Francisco, who went to Palm Desert every year for many, many years?
Yeah.
You see, those aren't things people arrange.
Yeah.
They're things only God can arrange.
Yes, yes. Yeah, God is working now. Even I would think that when you were able to simply establish a relationship with her, that you saw God at work. Now, how far did this go?
Oh, you see, I did see it, God, at work. And that's why I could see that continuing to move forward in faith was the only direction to go.
Yeah.
And Dr. Boehm was a bit eccentric, shall we say that. But I think probably that many 92-year-old doctors are probably a bit eccentric.
Most doctors are dead at 92.
Yeah.
And a lot of their patients are
Yeah.
too. Yeah, I was kidding. Well, did she help you?
Oh, did she help me? You know, she ultimately contributed the whole $500,000 in one lump sum.
That you had to have for that school or that
Had
child
to have
care
it.
unit.
Without that child care unit,
You
the
couldn't
Marriott
do a
Hotel
thing.
would have not okayed
Yeah,
the use permit, and there would have
Yeah.
been
That
nothing.
was like a huge barrier there.
An empty lot.
And suddenly, not suddenly, but over a short
Yeah.
period of time, God just removed that barrier.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you got
That's
this-
why the
Wow.
word miracle
Yeah.
is apropos.
Now,
you see.
did she say, well, if you paint the church green, you got to have this and that? How about strings attached?
Well, there were strings.
Okay.
Now, Attorney Borg was her attorney, but her financial director was a man by the name of Greg Wallace.
Uh-huh.
Now, he was a great, big, tall, 6'6" or 7" Scotsman.
Uh-huh.
And so this is what she said to me. She said, now, when I asked her if she would front the money for this child care center and we could put her name on it,
Uh-huh.
she said, if you can convince my financial advisor
Uh-huh.
as to the worthiness of the project and the amount of money,
And
I will
in other words,
okay
he had
it."
complete
Oh,
control over what
oh,
happened here almost.
Oh,
right?
absolutely complete control.
Yeah.
And
So now here's
uh,
another barrier again.
never met him.
Yeah.
And so I learned a little bit about him as much as I could. As I said, I learned he was Scotch, and I thought, well, how in the world am I going to deal with this great big tall guy, a foot taller than me, and furthermore, he's a great golfer. And I began to think about this. Now, Lord, how can I use this, and how can I put this together? And then it occurred to me, my great 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 grandfather was Scotch. Scott. You got it. His name was John Knox. And so I figured, well, when I meet Greg, I'm going to tell him we're relatives. And I'm going to invite him to come and play a game of golf. Now, you know, in the Palm Desert Church, there were some really great golfers. And Don Lee was a good one, a great golfer. He won many trophies, being a wonderful golfer. And so I said to myself, I'll get these guys together. And we'll come up to Lake Arrowhead, and we'll put them out on the golf course here at Lake Arrowhead, and we'll play a game of golf. And so I brought them up here, and we went out and we played a game of golf. Now, they played golf. Me, I walked along and hit the ball.
You're like me.
Yeah.
I would just carry the
Yeah,
club.
oh, okay. And we got down to the 18th hole, right outside of my window here, and we came to the 18th hole, and the score was tied. Now, I don't know how it happened, but somehow Don missed that last putt. Now, you're going to have to ask him, you know, about how that happened, because he never misses a putt. But it happened. So I brought him up here on my deck, and we sat down, and after some small talk, I said to Greg, Greg, you've been Dr. Boehm's financial advisor for many, many years, and she's 92 years old, a wonderful doctor. Wouldn't it be wonderful to build a child care center around the corner from the Eisenhower Hospital and, of course, the Betty Ford Center and all the wonderful outlets, medical outlets that go with it, and put her name over there on a child care center?
And you had some property.
Yes, we had bought the property, which was sitting vacant.
Yes.
And
What do you
he
say?
looked at me, sort of scratched his head and said, I'll think about it.
Well, that's the first step, right?
That's the first step.
Did he give you any time schedule or
Well, he said, give me a week or so.
anything? Okay. And so did you sweat during that week, and did you do some praying?
Boy, you know, it was one of those faith weeks.
Uh-huh.
I was sort of getting used to him by now,
Yes.
because I had seen God's hand working, opening doors that
Yeah.
were really impossible. And so as I saw this, I just said, well, God, you know, this is in your hand. We're going to wait until the telephone rings.
Well, judging by what's down there in Palm Desert now, I'd say he came through. What did he say?
Well, you know, he did. He called me up on the phone and he said, Pastor Noam, I'd be pleased to honor Dr. Boehm and to approve the project. And you see, these are the behind-the-scene events
Yeah.
that nobody ever sees or knows or hears about, and that no one can anticipate or ever plan on. These are the miracles referred to in the article. And you know, Ken, I have discovered over the years that God never works in the way we expect or even can anticipate, because I think he likes to surprise us. And you know, when we get surprised, we can't take the glory.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it makes it easier for us to be like Christ, the way he deals with us. He doesn't make it harder, sometimes anyway. Sometimes I think he probably does make it harder, and to test us, you know, and help us develop. But now, so he agreed, and then Dr. Boehm signed the check.
Signed the check.
Yeah. Wow.
Yep.
Now, you've got what you need to go to the city council with, don't you? And so what happened?
Well, there is just one more piece that has to come in place. Got to have a builder.
Oh yeah, you've got to get the place built.
We didn't have any money to build the place, and in order to build the place, we had to get the mission builders.
But now, did you have a permit by now?
Well, let's go back and we'll answer that question. Yes,
Okay.
we went to the city council.
Okay.
Now, we went to the city council several times, because the first time they put everything on hold.
Uh-huh.
But there was one blessing about this. The Marriott Hotel wasn't there, and the racket club wasn't there, and
Objecting.
and they just put us on hold. They said, you have to come back again. And we did come back again. Now, let me say that when we went back, again, I think basically the whole church came down and filled the whole city hall. And I think they were all praying for me when I went out there with shaking knees, you know.
Yes, you were David going to.
Yes, and ultimately we got our building permit and our use permits by one vote.
Wow. Wow.
Yes.
Couldn't have been closer.
Well, but you see,
Close
with
enough.
God, it was all done in His mind, you see.
Now you need builders.
Yes.
Okay, you need a contractor. Did you have someone in your church who said, I'll contract for this job for $300,000?
Well, first of all, we didn't have 300,000, so we needed somebody who would come in, who would build, and that was the Mission Builders. You know, I have to tell a little story about them. It wasn't something I put in my notes, but when we were building or about to build in Oceanside, the Mission Builders were building close to Oceanside, and so I said to myself, we'll go over and get them to come out and build our Oceanside project. Now, it was a huge project. And so I went over and I talked to Gary Rusk, who was in charge of the builders, and I said, Gary, we'd like to have you come over to Oceanside and build the church. He said, what are you building? I said, well, we're building a serviceman center for the military, and we're building some schoolrooms and what have you. And he said, we don't build those sort of things. What we build is churches. Well, I was really taken back because we needed them. So I said, well, could I come and talk to the Mission Builders? And he said, well, it won't do you any good, but you can come. So I came out there one evening about dinner time, and I'd been thinking about how am I going to approach these guys that are Mission Builders. And so I walked in and I said, well, I'm Pastor Norm from Oceanside. We're building a center for the military, a community center for the military. Camp Pendleton, you see, and all the military guys came to my church, and they'd come and sleep on the front lawn. And Gary's back there poking me saying, we don't build anything but churches. So I said to the Mission Builders, I said, how many of you guys were in the military? And a whole stack of hands went up. See? And I said, how many of you guys would have liked to have had a military, a place at the church, a housing place with showers and basketball courts and all? When you were in the military, would you have liked to have come off the base and been able to go to that on the weekend?
Yeah.
Boy, all their hands went up. And I said, would you guys be kind enough to come over and build our church at Oceanside? Every hand went up. Now, Gary almost fell off his seat.
What could he say?
What could he say? So they came to Oceanside and built, and Gary Rusk and I became very, very good friends. And so when I asked him to come down, if he'd do the Palm Desert Church, he agreed. And this is how God leads.
Now, your members are going to be involved in this, right? Your church members.
The members, after the initial contact of everything that went on with the city and all this behind-the-scenes stuff, the members, you bet, actually did the grading. They were involved in every aspect of construction, including the installation of the first phase, which was modular units. You know, the first church in Palm Desert wasn't what we see today. It was a group of modular units in which the church and the school was housed. In fact, we rented the church. And the school came together with Palm Springs and the Spanish church and our church all came and gathered there on the lot. And Ken Nelson was the first principal. Now
who was doing that grading
for
you?
Terry Stoles. Stoles family ran a earth-moving operation, big. They'd been there in the area for many, many years, and so they came over and they did the earth moving. And then we had another guy in the church by the name of Al Hurd, and between these guys, Terry and Al did all the steel work in the entire church. He had a shop that he ran, and those big girders. I have no idea how Al got all that stuff down there. I passed him. I was driving down one day from Yucaipa, and there was Al over on the side of the highway
Yeah.
with this long girder
Yeah.
sticking, I don't know where. And I'm looking at him, Al, how do you dare to ride down the road? How do you dare to go down the road with that truck and that? And Al just marvelously put that steel in that church and put it up. And of course, there was Larry Roshnowski, who was just a master at almost any trade.
Oh.
And then there was Don Lee. And Don Lee was a master organizer. He had been in charge of the entire West Coast for IBM for many
yes.
years.
Oh, yes. He must have had some talent. Now, what about this Dr. Schlotthauer?
Oh, yes, Dr. Schlotthauer. Well, now, Dr. Schlotthauer, most unusual lady. She and her husband had moved to the Indio Church numerous years before. Wonderfully loved lady, wonderfully loved. She became the first elder of the church. Now, the conference trusted her. I think I was known more as a shaker and mover. Shakers and movers aren't necessarily people who are loved.
Yeah.
I noticed on the sign they put up at the back of at the Palm Desert Church, it says Norm Farley, visionary.
Yeah. Well, yes. I mean, you have to have people with vision for something like this.
Dr. Madge was loved,
Uh-huh.
and people followed her.
She was a visionary.
She was a visionary.
Yeah.
And you know what? Every time there were ruffled feathers in the church, she simply went over and stroked
Showed
them.
them.
See,
Yeah.
everything quieted down, and she made my ministry possible.
Yeah.
And
Boy, it's great to have people like that in the church. Wow. Well, the church in India was quite adequate. What were the key factors that prompted the move? Now, she was involved with that move from India to Palm Desert.
oh yes, I could never have convinced the church.
Big psychological problem.
Big
right?
psychological
Yeah.
problem. You had many people rooted in India who said, "This is comfortable.
Yes.
We don't have the money, and what's over there is impossible."
Well, they were right, weren't they?
They were right. And I'll never forget, the evening came around, and it was the big vote. And Dr. Madge went home. She put on her beautiful blue dress. Now remember, she's distinguished, elderly, demands respect by her very walking to the front of the church.
Uh-huh.
She stands up in front of the church and she says to the church, "Now, brothers and sisters, God is leading. And I know that every single person here is going to vote in favor of buying that lot and moving."
Man, she must have had something going between her and
Marvelous
heaven
lady.
there. Yeah.
And well, there were a few that didn't vote that way, but a large majority of the church voted that way. And then, of course, we had to find a place to meet. Sold the church, no place to meet. And Pastor Ken, I went to every single church in Indio, in Palm Desert, in Rancho Mirage. I went to every single church trying to find a place for us to meet. Not one.
Said yes.
Not one said yes, except
Uh-huh.
the Presbyterian Church in Indio. And I asked them, "Why did you say yes?" And they said, "Well, we said yes because when we were building, you rented us your church.
Logical.
It pays to be good neighbors."
Yes, absolutely. Can't just take, we have to give, don't we?
That's right.
Yeah. Now, somewhere along the line, you left.
You did ask an important question, though, before this that I
Okay.
should have spoken to. What were the reasons we needed to move from India?
Yes, yes.
One day I was walking down the street, and Marge and Forrest Stoles had been longtime members of the church. And there was a moving truck out there, and they were moving. Well, this astounded me, and I couldn't understand why Marge and Forrest Stoles would be moving. And so I stopped and I said, Marge and Forrest, I said, why in the world are you leaving India? Said, we're leaving because of the demographics, and we'd like to suggest that you follow suit as soon as possible.
Okay, demographics, where populations
Yes,
are
the
moving.
populations were changing, and India had become very, very largely Hispanic, and an English ministry could not have, an Anglo ministry could not have survived, and so it made all the sense in the world to let the Spanish people have our church.
Or you could have learned Spanish.
All I knew French.
Well, okay. So they helped you look in that direction. Anything else going on there that you can remember? There was some property available.
Yes, that property over on Country Club.
That was a prime piece of property.
Oh, my.
It still is.
You know, what I ultimately learned about that property was that the city owned all the property, hundreds and hundreds of acres. I forget whether it was between Dinah Shore and Country Club or one of those streets above. They had bought every single piece of property and had permitted nobody to build because hidden away in the city archives was the city plan where they planned to build 2 golf courses.
Oh, yeah.
And on the property out in front, they wanted high-paying, high-tax-paying,
Beautiful.
beautiful, yes,
Yes.
yes.
Something there that really fit the area.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
Isn't that something? Well, anyway, how did it happen that you ended up moving?
Well, after we had put the bought the lot and done the grading and put everything in place and moved the modular units on, after we had done that, I pastored there for 2 years in the modular units. This was the Palm Desert.
How long had you been in India?
I think I
roughly?
was in India about
Several years?
5 years. Well, I was in the church in India about maybe 2 or 3 years, and then we were in the Presbyterian church a couple of years, and then we were a
Okay.
couple of years in the modular units.
Okay, so you were the pastor of that congregation for
8
7 or 8
years.
years, yeah.
Yeah, 8 years.
Uh-huh.
And so it was about 1996, and we'd been in those modular units, as I said, about 2 years, and one day my telephone rang. And it was Gary Rusk of the Mission Builders. And he said, Pastor Norm, he said, when is the date we have to begin building down there in Palm Desert? I said, well, it's about a year, Gary, it's about a year from now. He said, well, we've had some problems and we have to postpone our coming for a year beyond that.
Wow.
Well, I hadn't anticipated that, and so immediately I went down to the city and I put in a request to extend our permit. I told him, our builder can't come and it's necessary to have him to have the money to finish this project. And so they extended the permit for a year. I think that's quite another miracle in itself.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so the Yucaipa Church was open, and it had it was a pretty big church, about 700, I think, and I could get a couple of assistants, and so I had called the conference, and I said to the conference brethren, my health is failing. My blood pressure had gone up, and my doctor wanted me to get out from under the load of stress.
Yeah, you've been under a lot of stress for a long
And
time.
so now the project was pushed off a couple of years. And so I said, I will take the call to Yucaipa. And the church said to me, could you recommend a good pastor? And I figured that they needed somebody who would stroke feathers and sing good music and do good pastoral things, because it had been
A rough
a rough
several years.
a rough period of 8 years
Yeah.
with all of these things happening, moving churches and buying land.
The
and
church itself had been under stress.
the church
Yeah.
itself had been under stress.
Uh-huh.
And so I recommended Mike and Sharon Hansen. Sing beautifully, came down, took my place at Palm Desert, and the people loved him. They just loved him. And things were just going along marvelously.
Good. But now the city fathers have been placated, you might say. They're cooperating. And you go now to another church. Did you follow doctor's orders?
Well, I better put that part in. When I went up to the other church at Ukaipa,
Yes.
of course I had a couple of assistants, and when the mission builders didn't show up, and there was a problem with getting the plan signed off,
Oh.
the city fathers got very restless,
Oh my,
and they called up the conference.
more stress.
And they said to the conference, Joseph is down here, we don't know him.
Oh my, oh my.
Farley we knew,
Uh-huh.
but the new pastor we don't. And Farley knows the architects and the committee members and all that. Would you send him back down and
my.
let him work with the
Oh, my.
project?
Yeah.
So the conference called me up and said, would you go back to Palm Desert? And they said, you can put your 2 assistants to work and let them run the church. You go down there 2 or 3 days a week, and you spend 2 or 3 days a week up here, and everything will be just wonderful. Well, that's what I did. So Pastor Mike opened up an office for me, and I went down and had my office again back in the modular unit, and I worked with the city through this whole period of time to keep these problems in check. And may I say that Pastor Mike did a marvelous job in having fundraisers and carrying the church forward. In the meantime, I had a heart attack.
Now, hadn't you been told you were under a lot of stress and you needed to sort of cool it a little bit, or did you just tell yourself that?
No. I was under a lot of stress, and I needed a break. And I had a heart attack, and I went to the hospital, and I spent 10 days in the hospital, and
Where was this?
in Redlands.
Okay.
And they decided I needed heart surgery. So they put me on the gurney, and they were wheeling me down to the surgery room, and my wife ended.
She said, stop. What did she say?
She said, I want another opinion.
Oh my, oh, so she did say stop.
And the surgeon looked up, who was walking there, and he said, I quit.
Well, that takes care of that.
That takes care of that. And so I was assigned another doctor. They put me through a whole rift of more tests. And the result that came back was, you can probably do without surgery if you retire and take a year off.
Well, did that sound good to you?
Oh yes, it was wonderful and wonderful advice. And so I immediately went back to rest in Palm Desert, because that's a haven of rest, you see.
Yes.
And then I came up to Ukaipa on the weekends to preach, because that's the holy day of rest.
Okay.
You see.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I did this with a big
kept-
bottle of nitroglycerin in
Yeah.
my back
You
pocket.
just kept going.
Well, I did. And it took about, I think, a year and a half before I was really able to function anywhere near normal. walking up a hill, my heart pained, and but I took
Yeah.
nitroglycerin.
Uh-huh.
Now, you see, I couldn't have ordinarily got away with this, but being Scotch, I kept my mouth shut. And I didn't say anything to anybody except the first elder of my church.
Oh, yeah.
Nobody knew.
And he knew what to do if
And
things didn't work out.
that's correct.
Yeah.
That's correct.
Wow. Well, Pastor Mike left Palm Desert in 1998.
Mhm.
What happened after that?
Well, you see, I had an office down there,
Oh, yeah.
and I was
You
there.
were left by yourself then.
Yes.
For how
well,
long?
Pastor Hansen was there, but President Mallory looked over the entire situation, and he
The
decided.
conference president.
Yes, he decided that evidently that they needed an entrepreneurial type of person to not only finish the project or be there during the project along with myself, but also to finish maybe a second phase.
Yes.
So he, one night I was sitting there in my office, and the president called me up and he said, Noam, he said, I need your help. I said, well, what would you need? He said, well, I'd like to bring in Pastor Blue. Would you go to the Palm Desert board
Uh-huh.
and recommend his name? And I trusted
Mallory.
Mallory. I
Uh-huh.
trusted him because of all the things I knew about him, I knew one thing was especially true. He was a wonderful administrator.
Uh-huh.
And he had good insights into people and situations. So I figured he must have another good place for Pastor Hansen, and he did. And he brought in, and I recommended Pastor Blue to the Palm Desert Board. And because I had a long track record there and was still on the staff working, they received the recommendation, and Pastor Blue became the pastor of the church.
The new pastor. Okay. Well, that took some of the pressure off. And did you then go back and spend more time?
Oh, as people will see, we're going to show a video. We've put together a video of the
whole project.
the project. Yes, a short
Okay.
video, and what they'll do is hear my voice through the entire.
Okay, so we've heard the story now.
Yes,
Now we're
yes.
going to see the story, and with that information that
I want to add one thing. Not only was it the professional contract type people like Terry Stoles and Al Hurd, Larry Roshnowski, Don Lee, but the people in the church like Ken Kalstad and others who were dedicated, wonderful people came out and worked day by day on the entire project. Now, I can't mention all the names of the people that came. I would forget 100 of them. But if people are interested, they can go to the current church, and up on the back wall is a plaque. And there are listed the names of the people who contributed to this project. Now,
that's great.
I'd like to say thank you, Lord,
Uh-huh.
that I could be a part of this,
Yeah.
that the doors were opened that were impossible.
Yes.
I didn't do it.
Yeah.
God did it. I'm an instrument
Yeah.
that was there in his hand. And I thank him for that privilege.
We should always be open to God's leading, and always look for his openings, and to pray about it and ask for the wisdom to know what doors to go through, you know. But anyway, this has been a very inspiring story to me.
Now, the inspiration of this story is this. Pastor Blue has taken the plans that we drew, and there's a man's name I forgot to mention, Jack Culver.
Uh-huh.
He was the architect who drew these lovely plans, and they couldn't just be planned, they had to be architecturally acceptable for Country Club
Yes,
Drive.
they had to fit that area.
Yes. And Jack was not a member of the church, and he drew these plans, so he did that. But I have to say that Pastor Blue has picked up the second phase of these plans that were drawn, and he has gone on and completed that project. And very soon he's going to have an open house and a dedication, and I'd like to say how thankful I am for that. And one last thing. The Child Care Center in Dr. Baim's name received community recognition as being probably the best child care center in the entire
I
area.
really like that.
And I'd like to thank the people who ran that and who saw over that. It became a marvelous community project
That's fantastic.
and a wonderful witness for Christ.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you so much for telling us this story. Now, let's sit back and watch the video.
That architect. No, you're going to have to pay to have that catch basin moved over there. You don't want to do that.
You got that right.
do happen.
Tony!
Yeah, what a ham, huh? Yeah.
Well, Dr. Boehm, here we are on the 20th of March, down here in Palm Desert, and look at what's happening. Here is Ken Kolstad, mission builder and a member down here at Palm Desert.
Here's my brother.
And here's his brother.
Brother here.
Good, which one?
This one here.
And here's Ken's brother.
Do we have to have... Maybe I'm... Oh, no.
Well, it's nice of you guys to be here working.
Excited to get going here, I'll tell you.
This is the boss, Gary. Gary, say hello.
Yes, sir.
Say hello to
Hi.
Dr. Boehm.
Yeah. Hello, Doc.
Yeah, she's the one who's putting the Child Development Center in down here. Well, Dr. Boehm, here are some of the kids in the school. After school hours, they didn't go home yet, so they're playing on the jungle gym behind the school. There's a lot of work going on out there, and we're glad about that. And the wood is going up, and the cement's going in, and the plumbing's in, and the electrical's in, and within 3 or 4 weeks, things are really going to be looking good, and hope to bring you down and have you have a look. This is Monday morning, March 25, about 7:45 in the morning, and here we are in Palm Desert again. And this morning we're taking a picture. They have the people out here this morning. They've hired a few boys to come in. They're getting ready to pour another pad or two, and so they have some fellows over here that they've hired to come in this morning, and they're digging and getting ready for the cement work. You see a lot more lumber in the yard this morning. They've been bringing in lumber and materials and supplies.
It's over.
Well, they're putting in another footer right down through here. Needs to be 15 inches deep, and so in it goes. In the meantime, over here, the inspector from the city of Palm Desert is working with Pat Nahara, and Pat is doing cement work and footers, and so they've hired some of this footer work down there. They've got a few amigos in here doing this, and then of course you can see in the background mission builders are all over there. They're starting for the morning. They're going to continue on with their framing over there and keep that going. Big project.
Okay, hold it while I stretch it.
Just a minute, Carl.
You gotta hold it? Okay, let me stretch it, see what happens.
there's some more steel going in everywhere you look. More steel over here. So they're making good progress as they move along. This is about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. It looks like there was a lot of cement that went in since the last time we were here. Well, Dr. Boehm, here we are on the 22nd of April, and we're down here in Palm Desert, and this is the little thing we looked at in the first pictures so long ago. It looks very much like they're getting ready to cover it in and put a roof on it. They've also started another whole section over here with the steel going up and walls going up and the framing going on, and that would be another wing. So we have 2 wings. It also looks like there's a lot more concrete poured. In fact, it looks like a large portion of the floor is poured. So that looks like good progress. And there's quite a lot of steel that goes in this structure. In fact, the whole main building is going to be steel. And Al Hurd is providing the steel, for which we're very thankful. He's a member of the congregation here, and it's going to save lots of money. It's a wonderful thing to have Christian brothers in the church like that.
Okay, hey Len Burline, how wonderful to see you, brother.
Oh,
It's been a long time.
hey,
When did you get here?
just this afternoon.
And you came by to see me? Thank you so much. It's so good to see you. Man, it brings back some
Thanks.
wonderful memories.
Thanks to Norman Ellis.
Thank you, Norman Ellis. That's great. Hey, I remember the times that you came down here, brought those Christmas trees down,
Oh,
you know?
yeah.
We started praying that from the time we heard you were leaving until you got here, and we couldn't believe when we saw the rig that you had that you got here. But what a blessing it was, because those Christmas trees are the beginning of our fundraising for the church that we were able to build. What a contribution you made, and we're richly blessed by what you did.
My little contribution wasn't very much, but I had some very interesting experiences coming
bet you
coming
did.
across. I first went to Reno, and on one of those trips, and then from Reno, I dropped off 150, 200 trees, and I knew Norm and Alice were waiting for me here at the church lot, and so on my way, I was very careful. But coming across the desert, coming across from Reno in Nevada, I remember very well that night. I felt something wrong with the trailer, and I went out there, and lo and behold, the nut was just about ready to drop.
Wow.
And that ball, and as I was going through that area,
I mean, you're not holding the trailer.
the nut holding the ball of the
Yeah.
on the trailer, and I screwed it tight with my own hands, and then got the pipe wrench out
Wow.
and whirled it around a
What do
few
you
times.
suppose told you that there was something wrong?
Well, I know that my guardian angel was watching over me, and that wasn't the first time, nor was it the last time that a marvelous thing happened. I lost the trailer one time, right after that, over at Fresno area,
Really?
Stockton, and it came off completely.
Wow.
But coming back to this, we came down here, and Norm says, well, what should we do? Well, I said, Saturday night, bring all your folks out to a little party and gathering, and we'll sell trees.
No trees.
I'll open the back of the truck and the trailer, and we'll take a few knives and cut the trees open. They'll see what beautiful
I
fresh
remember those
trees.
days.
Do you remember
Yes, sir.
that?
And listen, was it all that trip down? Was it your wife Ramona praying for you all this time?
Well, was she praying? Come on in, Ramona. I wanna. You're part of this. One night, I was leaving home with the trees packed, and Ramona says, "You're not gonna leave now, are you?" And I said, "Hon, I gotta be down there on Saturday night. I gotta leave tonight in order to make it. I wanted to be a day early." Well, as it was, I was fit to be tied. And Ramona was fit to be tied. She says, "Len, you're not leaving." I got all ready. We had difficulty loading the truck and the trailer. And I had a number of Mexican workers there that stayed by the stuff and helped me right on through until I had it pulled down the door. And I had already filled with fuel. I was heading down the road. I waved goodbye to Ramona, and I said, really, I shouldn't be going. And she didn't want me to go. And I no more than got out on the main highway when I couldn't make it up the hill. My clutch went out on my truck. And there I was in the middle of the hill trying to go over the other side. Traffic was backed up, blocks and blocks and blocks. But Ramona, tell them what happened when you came out on the road to pick me up to see me. It wasn't a very happy sight.
I found him in the truck because he's a diabetic. He had gotten too nervous and his blood sugar dropped and he was perspiring and trying to munch. Anyway, we had to call a wrecker, a huge wrecker, to pull the
truck and the trailer.
The trailer went miles around to take it to a garage to get the clutch fixed. But I knew that God had intervened and stopped him because he wasn't fit to be on the road.
I wasn't
you
fit.
knew that, Ramona, didn't you? That's why you didn't want him to leave.
That's right.
And the Lord prevented him
So,
from going.
So he
nevertheless, we got that truck fixed by the next day. I was still able to leave. I told them, I said, I'm desperate now to get to California because they're waiting for me Saturday night. And so he got me done. He let all his other work go. The mechanic did, and took care of me, and I was out of there.
And did you make it?
And
For
we
Saturday
made it. I was there. I was greeting Norm and Alice on time. Went to church Sabbath morning at the
Praise the Lord.
at the church there, and that night we sold trees. when I think about those Christmas trees, we had a very big harvest of trees in Oregon at that time. Trees were not going too well. $10 a tree was about the best that I could get. So I remember so well. Norman said, well, what will we sell trees for here? Well, I said, if I get $10 and you get $10, that'll make 20 bucks a tree. Well, really, that was a bargain. If you ever called a bargain here in California, because many people were paying $50 and $60 and $80 at that time for the same tree. So I did clean out my inventory,
Oh, that's great.
and you guys profited. It
We
went
certainly
to
did.
making money for the church and for the new building fund, and I went home satisfied too.
That's great. Let me ask you a question.
Yeah,
Did you learn to listen to Ramona?
listen,
He's still learning. He's still learning.
I am still learning, but she was a blessing to me that time and many times since.
Hey, good morning, Terry.
Morning, Donald.
How
Good
are
to
you
see
this
you.
morning? Good to see
Very,
you
very
always.
good.
Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah, you know, I've been thinking lately about our church over here and how it began and all the things we went through early on when we were over in Indio, and we decided to move over to Palm Desert. And thinking about all the things your mom and dad did and the things that you did. And, you know, we talked to Ernie Tripp once in a while. Remember Ernie Tripp?
Oh, yeah.
Ann? And you know, we went through an awful lot to make this move over here, and you had a major part in it. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your role and some of the things you did early on?
I guess to start off with, my parents, when they married in 1950, did not have a faith to speak of. Then when I was about 3 years old, 1955 or so, my mom decided that needed a change, and she went to the small Adventist church in Indio off Avenue 44. And at that time, she started going to Sabbath school, took my sister and I, and my dad wasn't interested. After a year or two, Elder Grimstead saw my dad and introduced himself. Hi, how are you? Glad you're here. You know, the normal things that the Adventist church does when you come as a new person. And on, and my mother became baptized, and my father became baptized, and we as children went through the grammar school there. Ernie and Ann Tripp were, I think you would call them, the founders of the church. Dory Hine, and some others that I can't remember as a small child, but yeah, my mother was the treasurer for many, many years. My dad was the deacon, head deacon for many, many years also. So our family was a ongoing contributor to the church.
So they were really part of a pioneer. They were really right at the beginning of the Indio Church, weren't they?
That's correct.
Yeah.
The Indio Church was at Avenue 44 for a while. Then they moved to Clinton Street in Indio, and then after that moved again to the Presbyterian Church on Monroe Street, and then we made the final move to Palm Desert. We rented on Monroe, and then bought some property on Country Club Drive in Palm Desert, and then started the grading process. My father was a rancher, grew grapes, citrus, dates, and we had equipment. So I got my contractor's license, grading, paving, and we used that to help facilitate the church in grading the property so that we could get moved over there.
So you were involved in really starting from the bare ground and leveling it out, and then I think you're involved in a lot of the irrigation and all the connecting into the city sewers and things like that, weren't you?
Well, actually, when it came time to grade, yes, I did put in the irrigation for dust control and things that were required by the city. But when we actually started, uh, the church has a program to have retired people come down and assist in the building of the church. They always use their own people, which is great. It saves us money. The city of Palm Desert decided that they wanted a grade A or engineering licensed person to head the project, and the conference only had a B licensed person. So there was a friend that my dad and I had worked with called Dateland Construction. The owner of that construction company was Jim Rickard, who we had done business with, and at the same time they were also renting his church was renting from us. And because of that, we had a good dialogue, and he was willing to put his license and his company up as the construction grade A license to get the project started. So Jim worked with us very, very well. He paid for all the laborers, anything else that we needed. He fronted the money and we reimbursed him as such. But he was instrumental in what we needed to get the project going.
Well, I remember that, Terry. That was a big risk he took, wasn't it?
He had never really done a project building. His project mainly were street improvements, water, sewer, grading. Actual building the building he hadn't done, but his license allowed him to do so, and he was willing to take that risk. So,
You know, I remember that very well, and every time now when I see a Dateland water tank,
yeah.
I say, man, what a great man that he was to have done that for us, because without him, I don't think we could have done it.
No,
We
could
needed
not.
that grade A license, and he was the
That's
one that
correct.
had it. So we were richly blessed by that relationship that you and your dad had with him.
Yes, Jim saved our neck there in that the city was insistent on having a grade A license. They would not accept a B. So it was because of his desire and the relationships that we were able to do what we were able to do.
Yeah.
And I think God provided that man to us at that time when needed.
I believe so, and I believe that God has richly blessed him. I understand he's expanded his business recently. Is that true?
Oh, he has doubled or tripled his business.
Wow.
In fact, he bought out a construction company called Meredith and Simpson, who was also a landmark in the valley. So he owns not only the construction side, but he also owns the building side also.
That's what happens when we do the good things that God wants us to do. He richly blesses us, doesn't he?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Well, Terry, it was great reminiscing with you, and
My pleasure, Don.
I look forward to seeing you at church.
Absolutely.
Greetings, I'm Robert Moon, and I've worked over a period of time with Dr. Norman Farley on various projects. I'm from Andrews University, retired, but at that time I was a dean and functioning in other capacities. And we were involved in helping facilitate various activities that resulted in the building of the church that is across now from the Marriott. And I have some people with me this afternoon that were also very active, and we're going to talk about some of the things that happened. And just to my left is Larry Rosnowski. And next to him is his wife, Trudy. And next to Trudy is Alice Farley. At any rate, we're sort of going to move around here. And Trudy, we heard, was the party girl. And she ran all kinds of parties to help people get there and get the right spirit and get things done. So, Trudy, could you tell us a little bit about the parties and what you did and what the purpose was?
Well, a lot of it was the purpose was to bring the children which is the future of our church, are always very important to Norman and Alice and Larry and I. And so we used to continuously have Saturday evening parties for the children to come, and especially the youth groups to come and enjoy eating and just have a fun time. Larry and I used to bring our Model T over to Eleanor Hurd's when we'd have a party there, a corn feed or whatever other parties that we had there. We would always bring the Model T and give rides to the young and the old. They used to enjoy those things. And basically it was to keep the church, the youth coming to church and together. And so those were the fun times.
Well, after you got the property, it was a matter of getting the property ready. And I understand, Larry, that you worked with somebody who had equipment that helped take care of the surface and get it leveled and so on. And tell us what you did and who you worked with.
Well, Terry Stoles and his dad had a land leveling company, I guess you would call it. They used to do farm work and leveling farm ground and irrigated ground. And we got together with him. Terry and I spent days out there staking the property out, deciding what dirt had to be moved where and when and how much. And people tried to tell us that you don't have enough dirt on the property for what we wanted to do. Well, we looked it over and decided there's plenty of dirt for this ground because it wasn't smooth, not even close to being smooth. Okay, we tranced it out, set stakes, and Terry came over with him and his dad, and they worked at it for a month, at least a month anyway, I don't know exactly how long, and got it pretty well flattened out, and we had too much dirt. So then we put it over on the property next door, the excess. So then we went back again and we set up we needed a pad for the church itself. So we set up the pad for the church, which is raised 12 inches above the normal ground. Well, in between doing the pad and that, well, we needed to have water because I don't know if anybody knows, in California they got a law of PM10. That's 10 parts per million of dust in the air. Anything over that, it's a serious fine. Well, you have to keep the ground watered. City water was very expensive. So then Terry and his dad knew of Rufus Sixkiller, which is a well driller. He's well known around the valley. He's Oklahoma Indian. Well, they got him and he said, well, I can do it. It would take time. Well, he worked at it for about 3, maybe 4 weeks because he hit bedrock at 400 feet.
Wow.
Well, after it's all said and done, the well is approximately 600 feet deep. But we got good water. He set the well, got the pump. Well, then we didn't have any electricity. Terry said, we got to have electricity to run this pump. Now I got to searching around and talking to people, and while I worked for the College of the Desert at the time, and it come up that they was going to have an auction at the college. Well, they had some surplus generators and stuff, that had been bought from military surplus. So I went over there and offered them monies for it. And no, it's got to go on the auction. It's been listed on the auction. It's okay. Well, I knew what they gave for the generator. Well, that was here nor there. It was a fundraiser basically for the school. So I went to the auction. Well, Terry told me how much to go. And so I went there and I did get to bid it. I bought the generator, or it's a 40K, which is enough to run Eisenhower Hospital almost. But we bought it for, if I remember correctly, it's $5,000.
Okay.
It's probably a $200,000 generator. So we got it over there, and then Terry and I was trying to decide how to move this thing around. Well, it's so heavy. Well, we got his backhoe, set it down, and we maneuvered it around, got it set in place, put up some sound shields for around it, as aluminum plates, and started it. Well, in between starting it and figuring out what was going on with it, it ran good, but we had 4,000 volts. Well, we only needed 220 volts. Well, other people saying, well, we had to put transformers in, you know, had to do this to cut the voltage down to run this 220 pump, which was pumping at 500 feet. So one Sunday morning, before anybody even knew what I did, I went out there and I knew this generator could have been changed around. So I went out and I observed it, took the panels off of it, switched the wiring around, got it set up to run 220 three-phase, which we needed to have for the pump. Started it up, pump run, fine, had plenty of water. I never told nobody. They come out and to check it, and I had told Terry. And he said, well, let's start it, see what happens. You know, he didn't let on. We was being coy about this whole situation. We started up and the pump took off and the water was there. Well, then I had a friend that worked at the college. Well, this motor needed power to shut it off, not to keep it running. Well, he was an electrician, so he got a timer set up that we had set up with the sprinkler valves, that when it would come to the last station, it would power up this and in turn shut the motor down. So this was an ongoing process. So in between, we had got all the, Terry and I got all the pipes and all this down and sprinklers set up so we could water the ground. And then after the church was set up, it was still watering the grass and
So
other
they
parts.
still use the motor and the pump and everything?
To this day, the generator's still there and the pump is still there. Whether they use it or not, I don't know.
I see.
I don't
Well, that's
get
interesting.
involved in that part of it anymore.
Well, that's an interesting story of how you, a lot of people work together to make something happen. It would have cost an awful lot more to get this in other ways and do that ground leveling if you and Terry hadn't helped.
Well, then we had problems with the city inspectors. They didn't like what we was doing. Well, since I worked with the college and I knew what was going on, I had a good friend, which was a state of California inspector.
Okay.
Well, I got a hold of him and we went out there and inspected what they were saying wasn't right. He says, you're way above and beyond what is necessary for this project. So then, I don't know whether it was Norman or Terry and Norman went to the city and confronted him, and from there, things kind of moved on without any more problems, you know.
Oh, that is a fantastic story. And then I guess you finally ended up with the building getting some people in from some sort of group that helps build too. I was here on the property when, was it Maranatha?
Maranatha Mission
Yeah,
Builders.
right. That was very interesting. Well, thank you so much for your insights and remembering the history. It, you know, it's quite interesting that first activity involved a lot more than sometimes just adding a piece after the fact, getting the property leveled and the water working and all the rest of it. There's a lot to taking a piece of rough ground and making it so that it's going to support the kind of church that is there today.